And then management doesn't really understand what audit's trying to do or understand or prove or what they're trying to test. In some cases, audit doesn't want to tell them because it's just sort of the way it's always historically been. You kind of keep things quiet, which I don't really believe in necessarily, but externally you kind of have to do that. So that could be a reason if that's what your training is. But I think the more transparent you are and the more you can talk with management about what is it that you're doing and understand the risk. At the end of the day, it's always about the risk.
This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show we have Jennie Wallace. She's the CEO and founder of Melody Advisory, where they make order out of process, risk, controls, and audit chaos. Usually, we do not let guests do their intro because early on in the show, years and years ago, we used to let people do that, and someone went on for like 10 minutes and gave their whole background. When I was a child, I got, beat with a, ruler by the nuns at the school. And I was like, we don't really need to know that. Like, just say you're the CAE, you're the partner, you're the whatever at this place. That's usually pretty sufficient in what you do there. But anyway, I didn't realize until we hit the record button and I saw the Melody Advisory in the background and I went, you're Jennie Wallace. You founded Melody Advisory. Where did that come from? And so anyway, Jennie actually does a really good job of succinctly kind of doing her bio and intro and doing that. And so all that to say, I'm just going to let that intro stand as itself and then let Jennie speak to that kind of in her opening question. But without, again, trying to give too much background, Jennie's been on the first, second, and third lines. And so one of the things that we wanted to hit on is what management thinks of audit. So what did she think of audit when she was in first, second line? And even now, as she works with internal auditors and management as a liaison sometimes, what they think of us. I think we probably have an idea, but she gives some kind of concrete examples of that. And then the way we phrase it is understand management, but I think it might be better even if we asked it again, is to empathize with management. I think that's a big, important piece of what we do just because of the perception people have of audit. So if they've never been part of audit, if they're SOX and they get audited, every quarter, annually, something like that, they're like, all right, here's the auditors. Yep, you found something wrong. We get it. We'll fix it. Thanks. But usually on the operational side, if they haven't been audited, it can be terrifying for them. And we know that it's rare, although it does happen for someone to get terminated because of audit findings, but that's likely their perception. They're going to come in, they're going to tell me everything that I did wrong. I'm going to get in trouble. This goes to the board. I'm going to get in big trouble. And so they kind of can tend to tighten up. So I just want to understand how to again, understand management, empathize with management's position. And then one reason there is this perception of audit and the negative perception is because a lot of times we give dumb findings, for lack of better words. And especially if you think about the finding, whatever it is, that going to the board and then sitting there and going, all right, do we really think they care about this? Maybe not, probably not. If you're in a maybe not, I wouldn't escalate it up that high. But obviously apply your judgment there. So no, we did want to understand what are some of those dumb examples. They're almost kind of fun to talk about. And so we hit on some of those. The thing that drew me to Jennie though, initially was I saw this post on LinkedIn about how not to be a trusted advisor. And it was pretty funny. And as I got to know Jennie and talk to her more, she is funny herself. And so we had her pull up that post. Actually, she put it in a nice graphic and walked us through that, which I thought was really great. And then we haven't talked independence in a while. It was kind of a hot topic for us when we first started because it was early 2020 and there was a lot of independence discussion because what can what can audit do basically to help the organization during COVID times? And so we had a lot of conversation around it. We haven't touched on it in a few years, and so we wanted to bring that up for those that maybe haven't had that conversation in a while or heard some different perspectives on that. All right, with that said, here we go. All right. So Jennie Wallace is here with us, yet you
Hello.
are with Melody Advisory rather than Jennie Advisory or Wallace Advisory or Jennie Wallace Advisory. Where's the Melody Advisory? What's that come from?
Melody is because I am a singer and my whole family is very musically oriented and talented, and the melody in music is the order within the chaos of the rest of the music, and that's what I do, bring order to chaos. So
nice.
That's why it's melody.
Oh, that's perfect.
Get you back to the melody.
That was unrehearsed too. Like we didn't even practice that. I just happened to notice it and went, wait, why is it melody? So what a good answer. All right, cool. So then a question that we've been asking a lot of guests also, just to kind of get them to get to know them a little bit more outside of just, hey, we're an auditor, that's all we do.
Right.
What's in either your internet browsing history or your ChatGPT, Llama, Claude, if you have an LLM of choice, what's in that history? What have you been, and it can't be travel related. We get way too many travel answers. Nope. We know travel's probably in there to some degree. Other than travel, what's been going on?
So I have a lot of interests. It comes with the intelligent brain of someone like myself. I say intelligent, I mean ADHD. Anyway, so I have a lot of things in my browser history and in my ChatGPT. ChatGPT and I are pretty much BFFs nowadays. I kind of talk to them a lot of stuff. So I was looking and I have a recipe for chicken and salsa, which was amazing. I have a window on 6th grade algebra problems for my son because he's very good at math, and I was showing him some algebra and he was like, show me another one. So we have some stuff there. And I also have insight into how to use Excel because I've been working on a client and I'm doing some stuff in Excel, and I've been trying to figure out some of the best ways to do things. And I was like, how was I doing this before? ChatGPT is amazing. And I've learned a lot. So I have a bunch of windows of various Excel. How do I use filter? How do I stuff like that? So
got it. It's great for every question that there's ever been about Excel. That's what I always tell people. Like when it comes to Excel, whatever your question is, it's been asked 1,000 times over. It's on the internet. You used to have to poke and prod, find this link. That's kind of what I was looking for. So let me save that one in case I can't find the exact answer, and I can take that one and kind of make it work. But yeah, with ChatGPT, it's a lot better. Have you found, I haven't tested this in a while, but I know the formulas weren't always great. I would say, hey, create a formula that does this, this, and this. I have this data in column A, this one in B. And again, it would get a lot of it right, but it wasn't quite there.
Yeah, I found that for some things, like it just sort of was like not perfect, or it wouldn't quite work. And then some of it was the data I was working with because it was expecting a certain type of data, and I would try to define it, and it wasn't. So it was a little bit strange for that reason. But some of the most recent ones have worked, and it's better if I put very specifically, I'm trying to match this to cell A1 in, but yeah, at least it gives me some idea that it's possible to. That's kind of what it is looking at the possibilities. It's like, well, if I wanted to create an Excel formula that did such and such, what are my options? And then I can play with those options and look at other places for more help. But that's what I use. ChatGPT is the biggest thing I use for like a start. I go, I have to write this whole thing. How do I write this whole thing? It starts it, and then I can be like, okay, well now I'm not just going to use it flat out, but sometimes I have. But usually it's like a start to something gets me thinking. So that's
a good way to put it, and that's how I've kind of preached about it also. Don't let it do everything, but it definitely helps you ideate on things, gives you something to refer to instead of just looking at that blank page. Yeah. Okay,
like, what are some competitors to such and such a company? And it comes up with some, and then it's not always right and it's not always complete, but it gives you a place to start. And so as you head down the internet path of looking for things, you can have at least a reference page kind of thing.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. Well, I know you've been first line, second line, third line. Now you're, I don't know, fourth line as you're.
I've been fourth line and external audit too.
Consulting services and all that. So you know what it's like to be in the auditee chair, and you've probably even heard, amongst your management peers when you were in those roles, audit sucks, or hey, audit's pretty cool. We didn't know they could do that. So
I don't think I've ever heard audit's pretty cool.
Okay, perfect. So what does management think of audit from your experience then?
It depends on the company. It really does. I know that when I left PwC and I went to my first role in management, I was actually surprised that people spoke about audit the way they did. I mean, they just, it's, it depends on the company. Like I said, some organizations find the function very valuable, others not so much. But even if they find it valuable, which I have a client that does find it valuable, but they still have that don't tell them anything they don't ask mentality. And no matter what you say to them, if you're audit, no matter what you say to them, it's hard to get them to break through that. And some of that is just how they are, and some of it is how they've been treated in the past, which is, kind of wise. This kind of subject of the relationship between auditors and management is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I have been on all the lines of defense and I have seen the interactions and the communication challenges and sort of the misunderstandings of people's purposes. And there's, things that we could do better on both sides. So that's something I've written a little bit about in some of my articles, and I think about it a lot because, it's not everybody's goal is to have a good company that follows the level of risk according to the risk appetite of the organization. Nobody wants anybody to fail, but it's like the internal conflict happens because of sort of the way audit's been acting and the way management's been acting. So,
okay. I know surveys is a pretty common way to do this, although I don't, how they aren't always great as far as getting the results on those. Even getting people to fill them out isn't super easy. Is that one method we can use to understand, maybe even empathize is a better word, but how we can understand management?
You could. I don't know how truthful people are with those things. The biggest thing, and this is my number one, no matter what you do in your life, you have to build relationships with the business, with everybody, right? And you have to come in as an advisor, as a trusted partner. And there are ways to do that. And I've strategically done that when I've been chief audit executive in other roles, honestly, across the board. And I think my ability to do that, I learned how to do that because of having roles in various functions and various, lines of defense, and sort of thinking about when I was the auditee, what would I have wanted to see, and being in that internal controls type compliance function and being on the receiving end of audit findings, I know what it is you can say to management that makes them realize why you don't know what you're talking about, So I've kind of I've got all the languages down, I guess. And I think it's about the relationships. It's really about the relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And I know one good way to kill relationships with management is to give them, let's just call it useless recommendations, or terrible recommendations, stupid recommendations, even low level, who cares? Nobody cares about that you have a typo in this memo recommendation type of stuff. I guess two things. One, is it just from your perspective, a CAE or senior manager, whoever's reviewing this audit report, apply your judgment and go, look, I will verbally communicate this, that you found this, but I'm not putting this in an audit report that's going to the board. So that's one, how can we do that better? Is that just a mindset thing? And then two, it's always kind of fun to talk about those though, especially it's beneficial in two ways. One, it's just kind of fun to talk about those and how ridiculous they can be. And then two, if you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was a ridiculous thing to report on, then it's probably good for those folks also. So kind of two and maybe even three questions there, but how can we be better at that? And then also just share your kind of favorite war stories of, I saw this one issue that was just, I cannot believe they wrote that up.
There's a few of those. Yeah. A couple of my favorites of ones so one of them was in one of the companies I joined. It was actually written by the team I inherited, and the client would not agree or give us any response to one of these findings we were trying to close, and it predated my time. And I kept saying, it was like one of those 8 out of 10 weren't signed or something like that, right? It was something very sort of cut and dry. It either happened or it didn't happen. And they just would not agree. And when I finally talked with them enough through it, I realized that what they didn't agree with was the title of the finding, because the title said non-compliance with requirements. And they were like, well, we comply with all these other things. How is this a non-compliance? And I was like, oh, you don't like the title? I'm like, I can change the title. Say 8 out of 10 weren't signed. It doesn't have to say non-compliance, because that's elevating the whole thing. And that's actually a big thing that auditors do that can be off-putting to management. It's oh, they're always coming to me with these high-risk things, and I don't agree that they're high risk. And I had a consulting firm once that was helping me out at one of the companies I worked, and one of the people wrote a report, and it was like management didn't have documented procedure for something, and they put it as like a critical risk finding. I'm like, does that mean I have to call the audit committee now because they don't have a documented procedure? I was like, that's like really out of proportion. So I was like, well, what are they actually doing? Are they physically doing the process? Are they signing things? Are they following the controls? Well, they are, right? So then writing down what they do is sort of like a low risk, right? Yes, you need to have it for sure. Policy and procedures are important. But to me, policies and procedures are not a risk in and of themselves if they're not documented. The risk is, are they actually performing controls that mitigate the risk? And, oh yeah, by the way, you guys should really document it. And maybe that's my experience being in like small company startups where they do a lot of great things, just don't have it written down. And I'm kind of like, that's okay, because at the end of the day, the risk is mitigated. The risk is not that they don't have something written down. So that's kind of some of my favorites. I had one, the auditors were like, you need a change committee to approve every time this change goes through.
Pretty common. Yep. That's pretty common. Yep.
Then the client's like, well, we have two people in the department who's going to be in the change committee. Is it you or is it you? Like, it was just, it's like you have to think about the context. And, it's hard when you're a junior person, I think, because you've learned a certain way, and, you kind of trying to make sure you're finding things, because sometimes, at the end of the day, we do try to find things at times. Because sometimes you're like, I didn't do my job if I didn't find something.
Right.
But those kinds of things are not useful to them, and that's what makes their opinion of audit go down. Because,
what it is. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
With in my experiences with an IT audit, like rarely did someone have the perfect password settings applied. We had our standard and we would bump it up and go, is it X amount of characters? I think we said 8 or 10. I can't remember. It changed at some point. Do you have that? Yes or no? Do you have logging set on? Yes or no? Do you have to change your password after X amount of failed logins? Yes or no? And like rarely was it just like, yep, you are equal to whatever we recommend, or you're above that. And so that was, kind of my first experience with that. And I was like, busted. You only have 8 characters and it requires 10. And they were like, yeah, that's true. I mean, we only have 8 instead of, what you're saying is 10, but all this other stuff makes up for that. And I went, oh, so we can't, we don't just ding you for yes or no. And that's where the idea of judgment, which I think is one of the most important things that we do is develop an auditor's judgment. Which is obviously very hard when you're brand new because you don't have experience, so you can't apply that. So that was the one that for me where it seemed like, every password setting I ever looked at wasn't perfect, but we were always able to go, well, yeah, but it mitigates the risk of what we're dealing with here, so it's fine the way it is, and having to wrap that up.
It's that larger picture. You're right. It's larger picture, and it's that collection of controls together. Like you said, maybe the password settings weren't what you wanted, but maybe they have 10 other things that mitigate that risk, and that's why you ask further questions. And you could, and I believe in, and a lot of my colleagues also believe in this as well, is that very transparent communications with management. So I would bring my last role, like, here's where we are this week. Here are the things we found. It was a little bit like Agile, but not quite. But it was more like, here's what we found this week. What do you think? And that gets you to either confirm or clear that recommendation, that finding throughout the course of the audit. So if you're finding like password settings are not right, instead of them not knowing until it shows up in an audit report where you've given it a high risk finding, listed down, you can say, I found this thing, tell me about it. And they can say, well, we did that because, they've thought about it, they've done this or that. They might have very much made a strategic decision not to follow that because of these other things. Or there's a system on their network that has to only have a password because it's an older system. It only allows 8 characters, so they have to do it that way. But then they have other controls. So it's just much more sort of complex and larger than just that one setting. So that's the kind of thing that why you have to use that level of judgment. And as you get more, experienced, it becomes easier and easier, and you start sort of seeing the bigger picture. But you can't just stop at the one and be like, that's it, it's over, we found everything's there. Sort of you have to like understand the context and what else they've done. And I actually, when I advise management and I'm on the management side, I tell them, write down all of your decisions. This is what I tell them, because I'm like, the auditors can be generally okay with things if they're not the way they expect them to be, if you can show that you've thought about it and made a different decision. So like, maybe the passwords were set to 8 and you thought about it and you made it that way because of these reasons. But the auditors are going to think you forgot, or that you don't know, or that it's something you're not thinking of. So that if you show them, yes, we went through this thought process, we did this risk assessment, we understood why it's a risk, we accept that risk because of this other factor, that is often enough for management to provide evidence to the auditors, like, here's what we did. So that's what I often do on that side, and that helps that with the big picture too, is to understand. So that's part of what I do in my role is in my consulting firm, is that I walk that bridge between where I can help the auditors do stuff and I can help management, like with the interconnections, because I can ask questions like before the auditors ask, like, oh, we need a list of every system you ever had in your whole universe. And I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Like, before you run around and get the stuff, what are you asking for? What is it that you need? And help them target, because, auditors also, we can only do the best we can do, right? We don't know the stuff the way they do. So we may ask for things that aren't necessarily going to make sense, but then management needs to guide us and not just run around trying to put stuff together. It just becomes very complicated.
We always had a decent amount of, when I was in public, we would always have that liaison position. Not always, but a lot of times we'd have that liaison position. It would go like, hey, you guys send me your request list and who it needs to go to, and then I'll send it out and get everything from them for you. And inevitably there was, and this person didn't have an audit background, the two that I'm thinking of, they're more like project managers. So they did what they were supposed to do, but they didn't have the context of the audit piece to it. And so inevitably we would get something back from management, and then we'd look at it and go, that's not really why we asked that. We actually need this, which was frustrating to the whole chain involved in that. But it was, if we would have had someone like you be our intermediary between that, you could have gone, hey, I think I know why you're asking this, but the way it works here is X, Y, Z. So is this what you want instead of this? And then that would have saved everybody time for sure, frustration for sure. And then, for every basically dumb request, I'm using dumb pretty lightly there, that goes to management or recommendation, that's just like one more kick of audit sucks, basically. Like, they asked for this is dumb, I don't know why they need this. Or they recommended we change, again, a typo in a memo or, in a policy and procedure, and that doesn't make sense. We don't care. Is it almost fair to say, like, you help change the perspective of internal audit departments now that we're talking about it like that?
That's what I try to do is I try to change the perspective on both sides. So, and I've been in that audit liaison role in some of my like second line, sort of first line roles, and I would be the filter because I did help and, like I said, push back. And why do you want a list of every system they ever had? What are you trying to target? What are you looking for? And knowing the business, I could help speak that language. It's kind of like, if you think of it as a business analyst on the IT side, it's kind of the audit analyst, I guess. We need to come up with a new job description, audit analyst, and everybody should have one. It's sort of because it can be a project manager, but if they don't have the context, and then management doesn't really understand what audit's trying to do or understand or prove or what they're trying to test. In some cases, audit doesn't want to tell them because it's just sort of the way it's always historically been. You kind of keep things quiet, which I don't really believe in necessarily, but externally you kind of have to do that. So that could be a reason if that's what your training is. But I think the more transparent you are and the more you can talk with management about what is it that you're doing and understand the risk. At the end of the day, it's always about the risk. And when I was in some of my prior roles, I would make sure that before I even started the audit, I did like a pre-planning phase where it was just information gathering. What do you do? Tell me about your things. What do you worry about? How can we help you? And then when we got to the, like, what are we going to be looking at, testing, walking through, we would present that to management. Here are the risks we think that are in your world. Here are the controls we think that manage those risks. Do we have it right? Did we miss something that you think is of a concern? Is there something here that you don't care about? And why is that? Because we may think it's important, and they may be like, nobody looks at that report, so nobody cares. Because people, it's a report that has they don't care because it's not something that they do anything with or it goes nowhere. So instead of us going through the whole audit, testing all this stuff or making a big deal about something that at the end of the day, the company doesn't care about, on the other hand, obviously use your judgment. If you think it's something they should care about, that becomes the finding. But at the same time, like, you do your judgment, you assess whether you agree, but it's all about that. You have to be that transparent, and then, like, audit asks for stuff. They don't quite understand the process. Management then gives it to them. It doesn't meet the thing. So that whole relationship between the two, both sides need to sort of they don't trust each other. And I've been on, like I said, both sides. And you're like, management's lying. They just wrote that document just now. I know it. And I try to tell management, they can tell when you just wrote it. So don't just write something. You give it to them. Just tell them you don't have it. It's okay. You can say that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then the other side, can they say they don't have it? Because what kind of like auditors are you dealing with? Because I've dealt with auditors who are not quite, I don't want to say as enlightened as I am. And we'll write that as a big giant thing. But then I'll push it back and say, look, they're working on it.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Because I distinctly remember this one woman who was just terrified because she didn't have, I think it was user access something. It was when like PCOB basically said, hey, everybody has to do user access testing periodically, their user access reviews. So that was like our big theme going into that year. It was like, hey, everybody, heads up. We're going to start testing for these way harder. We expect you to have this, and this in place. Anyway, this one woman didn't have it in place, and she was like, biting her fingernails to the stub, and I could see her foot, and I was like 22 years old, I barely knew what I was doing. I could see how nervous she was there the whole time, and I just stopped her, and I was like, hey, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, your access has always been fine in the past. This is just a new thing. It's not that big a deal. We'll note it. But then I was like, you can, implement it as soon as, you have the time, put this control in place. And then we'll basically go to them and go, she didn't have this. It's fairly new regulation. We're not holding anybody, it's not that big a deal. There's never been issues in the past, and it's fixed. Moving on. I was like, we won't get any questions. But, had it just been maybe someone who didn't explain that to her and just went busted, she might not have understood it. So I'm liking more and more what you're doing at Melody Advisory Services. Now that we're
try to do this. That's what I try.
Cool. Yeah. I don't have a great segue to this. I just know that when we had our conversation initially, you basically just had a bunch of good stories that I liked, and I tried to kind of speak to
what
those.
They are.
And so I'm just going to call this the flowchart story. And if you could share that story with us, then I'll just give you the stage. You go.
Okay. I can give you the transition too. We can say, could be, since I mentioned before about how important relationships are with the business, how are ways that you have worked to build the relationships? Why don't you say that?
Good segue. No, let's just run with that. We'll run it just like that. There's the segue, everybody.
Okay. So what I've done is, like I said, relationships are extremely important, and getting management to trust you is not such an easy thing, based on all the things we've been saying, right? Stupid findings and whatever. So what I have done in the past to try to start to build relationships in the new organization or wherever I've been is to come to clients or come to the organization with assistance instead of at them with an audit first off. So in my mind, the job of internal audit is to mitigate risk. And again, it depends on your audit committee and your CFO or CEO, to whoever the dotted line is, whether they're okay with this approach. But because that's independence, which we can talk about later. I would do a lot of sort of advisory work in the beginning, because to me, I was like, well, I'm looking at things and finding risk I can share with the organization they need to mitigate. I don't think that I necessarily need to run to the audit committee for every single thing, especially if management's already working on it. They've seen it, they've identified it, they've worked on it. So one of the things I did in one of my organizations was, like I said, started with advisory projects, coming to them with assistance instead of at them with an audit. And then when I did have an audit, it was much easier. And they were like, oh, you should look at this and this and this too. So one of the stories I have is that when I was new to the organization, I was going around meeting all the other execs and what's your group like and what do you do and what are the things that worry you and what are you working on? And one of the groups had said, no, that the CEO has wanted us to create this new process and we've been working on it. But, and I said, would you like us to help you write it down? We'll write it down for you. They were like, really? I was like, yeah, that's one of the things we do. We write down processes and make flowcharts. And they were like, okay. We had a few meetings. We made flowcharts for them. We sat through it. And even just sitting in the room with them, writing down what they said, we could ask a question. Have you thought about documenting this thing here? Or maybe there should be an approval over here. What do you think? And they would be like, yeah. And then by like the second or third meeting, they were like, we should put an approval over here. Well, why does that come first? Maybe we should move that. Because just seeing it laid out was enough for them to go, wow, that's so interesting. So from then on, they actually took that final flow chart and stuck it in the wall by their offices. And they were like, we have this thing and it's amazing. And they showed the CEO, like, this is our process. And then the CEO was having a hard time understanding, like, what are you actually doing? And they were going, we don't think these guys are doing the right thing. And I was like, but it's right there. That's what they're doing. And they were so happy about it. And I was buds with that group forever because it was we sort of bailed them out of a thing, but didn't violate any independence. It was nothing we actually did. We didn't design anything. We just wrote down what they told us and asked them some questions. And that was it. We did the same for a few other groups. And after that, it was like, we had people actually coming to us in an organization where nobody liked audit. Nobody wanted to talk to audit. They actually would come to us. I had this problem. And I would also, one of the ways I would build relationships also is sort of like being trustworthy in a way that I wasn't, and again, depends on the organization, being trustworthy in a way that I wasn't like I was happy to sort of take the heat for what I was doing. So I had a group come to me. I, had become, good relationship with the leader of the group. They came to me and they're like, we're having a problem with another team. We can't get them to listen to us. We can't blah, blah, blah. There's an issue here, an issue there. So we were like, all right, we'll look at it. And we just were like, hey, we had an idea. We're going to take a look at this thing. Our idea, totally our idea. And we looked at it and we figured out that there were issues between the groups. And it was like, and they had plausible deniability to say they came to us because I was like, I don't care. I have to do what I think is right. And if there's risk here and they're not able to operate, and they're a very important function in the organization because of communication challenges or whatever it was, and we can help with that, don't mind taking the heat for it. I'll take it. Like, yeah, I was totally my idea.
Yeah.
I was like, and they were forever grateful after that. And they came to us after that as well. And that's what you want, because that's the job, is to help mitigate risk.
I like that the take the heat story that you just shared, especially when there's communication issues between two groups, and pretty common, especially amongst SaaS, is the we'll just call it ineffective communication between sales and marketing. Marketing sends leads, sales can't close them. Marketing goes, you guys didn't close it. And sales goes, well, you sent us a bad lead. It's not qualified. So it's your fault. It's not our fault. And then there's always this battle that seems to happen between them. So if you're an internal audit and you can bridge that communication gap and fix that problem, you will be beloved across the organization, I'm sure.
That's one of the many. We actually did an actual real audit of the communications between two groups, because one of them would close deals and hand it to the other group, and the other group would be like, I don't even know what's in this thing. You never involved me in it. You signed a contract telling me I have to do stuff. I don't even know what it is. So we actually did an audit of that communication, and it was funny because when they heard we were doing an audit, they started working together because they wanted to do well in the audit. It was even just like, hey guys, how do you do this and how do you do that? And at the end of the audit, it was like, they're not in a bad place, because they were like, oh, now we were writing this policy and now we're, so it was just sort of raising it. I feel like I'm like the family therapist of the organization, like even sort of raising it and getting people to work together. And that was actually, another thing I did when I joined an organization was there was this just contentious relationship between another two departments, and they could not get this audit report closed because they just would not agree. Their management response was, this department won't let me do that. Well, that department won't let me do that. I was like, I'm not publishing 2 pages of 2 departments fighting. I'm not going to do that. So I actually was like, we're sitting in a room. Like, you're going to wear the T-shirt of shame and you're going to be friends. With the kid. No, I got them in a room, and then we just worked it out. And they were like, this is the first time we've ever sat in a room and talked about this. And I was like, you're welcome. And they worked it out, and then it was fine. And we were able to close the whole thing, and we could just write management that's going to do blah, blah, blah. And it was done. It's about that. And there's a lot of, that facilitating the communications and sort of helping them work together is something that's very valuable that we do for the organization, I think.
Given that, what you said, when you said that just them knowing that you were going to do the audit, that communications audit, they started working together better. I would say if you don't have the budget or the time to do that audit, just float it out there.
Yep.
Hey, audit's going to start marketing, sales, and start auditing marketing and sales communications. And I bet they'll go, hey, let's get this figured out so that we don't get in trouble, and let's start working together this way. So if anybody does that, please let me know. That sounds like something I would do if I was a CAE in that position. I'd just kind of let it leak out informally that we were going to be doing that audit. And then if we had the time, maybe we would. And if it works, then we'll just not do anything about it.
That is exactly right. But then, as long as that's sometimes a thankless job, because sometimes the organization may or may not see what you've done. But at the same time, as long as your dotted line understands, and you can, behind the scenes tell the audit committee, well, I helped a couple of groups work through some stuff. That's as long as you get credit for it. At the end of the day, you got to make sure you get some credit for it, but you also don't want to ruin your relationship. So you got to be very careful in the nuanced way that you communicate that, but you want your own credit for it, for sure.
There is some nuance there for sure. All right. Other areas where there's nuance is with independence. And this was probably when we first started doing the show 4.5 years ago, maybe closer to 5 now. It was a pretty hot topic just because it's one that gets talked about a lot. And so we haven't really hit on it in a while. And I know it's something and you've mentioned a couple times throughout this. So it's something that you seem pretty passionate about. I guess clear the air. What do you think real independence is? And if you could give if there is a black and white, to me, there's not black and white, but if there's a black and white scenarios that you could give, what would those be? Again, this is, I think, more for, I think it's for a lot of people, because I've even met directors who go, oh, I can't have a relationship with the CEO because it impedes my independence. And I go, that's the lamest excuse I've ever heard. Yep. You just don't want to do your job, basically, is what it sounds like to me. So
don't have to go out for dinner with them, but you should at least have meetings with them. You know?
Yeah, I'd be fine going out to dinner with them. I think that's where you start paying for things, whatever, is where it gets tricky. But
then you have to audit the expense reports. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so anyway, with that said, what's your take on independence?
So I have thought a lot about independence, and I think it's because of my background being in multiple lines and sort of seeing how much those lines bleed together, because things I've done in one when I was second line was the same things I did when I was third line. And, there was some stuff that overlaps. My view of independence is, as long as internal audit doesn't act as a control or like really make a management decision, such as a go, no-go decision, like, yes, you can spend this money, or no, you can't spend that money, that's where the line is to me. But there are a billion other things that we can be doing. And like I said, having been on second line, first line, all that stuff, the things I was doing in those roles, I could also do as internal audit because of that independence line. Of course, I will caveat it by saying you always have to check the appetite of the organization for what they believe independence is, because everybody has a different view. But my view is real independence does not really exist. There are, like, if you can stick to those lines, you can say you're independent, but at the end of the day, you work for the company. I was thinking about writing an article about this, so I had some thoughts on it. There are requirements in things like, New York Stock Exchange and places like that require an audit function, but there really isn't mention of what that audit function has to be. So instead of actually saying a competent audit function that follows the IIA standards, it's sort of it's a check the box exercise. So companies can have an audit function that is a head of internal audit, reports to the controller, and they've been out of school for 3 years. That's our audit function, hooray! Or they have, they replace the audit function every 3 years. And somehow the CFO or CEO, whatever, the sort of just convinces the audit committee that it's the right thing to do. Well, it's a business decision, or we're going to co-source or outsource, or we just whatever. Or they hire an outsourcer who reports directly to CFO and give them a limited budget. Still check the box. But none of those are necessarily that effective. And for the junior person who's in that role, it's not fair to them, first of all, but they're not going to necessarily have like the fortitude to push back and ask questions of the CFO. They're just going to write what the CFO tells them to write. The second scenario, they're going to be, by the time you get to 3 years is when you really start understanding the organization. You've got to go through audits for a while. And by the time you get to that point, they cut it out, and then the next person comes in and they have to learn it again. And by the time they've gotten to that point, time to go. So that's not really an effective audit function either. And then the outsourcing, as much as outsourcing can be an amazing bridge, like if you have nothing and you need something, I believe in that for sure. But I actually believe more in a co-source model, because I think you need a small internal team, a few people, even if it's just 3 people, maybe a CAE, a couple of team members, and you want to co-source. I think that's a great way to do it. But just having an outsourcer, that's entire budget, and I'm shooting myself in the foot because I could do this in my own firm too, but having like an entirely outsourced function is not necessarily effective either. Like I said, it can be a great transition. Anybody needs a transitional CAE, let me know. I'm happy to do that for you. But I could build your function and make a great thing, but I don't want to lead it long-term because someone else should be in there and they should be part of the organization. But at the end of the day, the organization decides and spends the money the way they think on the audit function they think they need. And the problem comes when you have leadership that isn't necessarily well educated on what audit should be doing, could be doing, can be doing. And sometimes that comes from not having had good experiences with audit, or not even having any experience with audit. They might have led like the CEO may have led organizations that never had audit because it's too small, or it was a private company, or some reason they just didn't have audit, and just doesn't have any understanding, doesn't understand risk really. I've met CEOs like that, unfortunately, doesn't really have a good understanding of risk, doesn't understand what the function is. So there's a lot of stuff there, and that's sort of near and dear to my heart because I feel like until this industry is regulated and they require us firms to have an audit function that looks like XYZ, I don't know how we get around that. I mean, some of it is you kind of have to do the best you can, and there are going to be times when you sort of have to do things in the way management asks, but at the same time, don't compromise your own integrity and ethics, right? Because that's number one, main, integrity, ethics is the most important thing, and objectivity. I think you can build relationships with people. I think you can speak to them. I think you can learn about them and from them in the organization. And since independence, like I said, in my mind, is I don't perform a control and I don't make management decisions, like I said, like spend, like let's reorg, that kind of stuff. I don't make those decisions. There's an awful lot that I can do, and that makes me valuable to them in a way that doesn't get me fired, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Like, unless they really just don't want you to find things, which happens too. Sometimes you're too competent and they just don't want you to find stuff, and that's it. But you don't want to work there anyway because they're going to,
I think we crushed that. And I was thinking, like, we haven't talked independence in a while. We also haven't talked co-source versus outsource in a long time either. And so for anyone who's not aware, maybe a junior person or whatever, even if you're not a junior person, just real quick, difference between co-source and outsource, as people are hearing that and go, wait, I thought that was kind of the same thing, isn't it? What's the difference?
Yeah, it's not the same thing. Outsource is when the entire function, you don't have anybody internally. You might have like a project person or like a liaison. Usually you'd have a liaison. Could be somebody on the CFO's team, project manager, something like that. Is often the person who just makes sure that the external folks can get access to people, things, systems, pull things for them. But you don't have an internal CAE. You have like the partner on the engagement is the one who's your CAE. But the co-sourcing model is when you have internal people, CAE, and maybe one or two people that you then give projects to outside vendors. And I think that's a great model. I say one or two people because I'm used to being in small organizations. Sometimes your internal model is 100 people because you have a very big organization and you still have co-sourcers. But the co-sourcers, I think, are extremely valuable because they come with a lot of knowledge of a lot of these specialty areas like IT, like cybersecurity, like AML if you're in a bank, like, some KYC, some of these really detailed forensic audits, fraud stuff can be, you don't necessarily do them every day or every year. So you don't necessarily have enough work to keep a person on staff to do that. But you need your core team who understands the business, who understands the players, what happens, the risks, and then you can outsource certain projects. Like when my last company, we did a lot of construction audits. So we had construction audit support from outside because that's a specialized area. And I had one person on staff, but we brought in external resources to supplement the team, that kind of thing. And I think that's a great way because those guys are experts. They do, cyber audits all the time, every day, lots of companies. They have a broader perspective, and you don't necessarily need an internal cyber person, but you'd want an IT auditor who's more of a generalist who could then say, well, we're doing a cyber audit. I need external support. That's the model I believe in. I think it gives everybody opportunity because you also can learn a lot from your outsourcer. Like I had an amazing, outsourcer that, my team just learned a ton from, just, worked with us and partnered with us and just really, really smart. But I didn't obviously have like the headcount and budget, and the person didn't want a full-time job. So, but they came and taught our team a bunch of stuff, and they brought the external knowledge. And then when we were done with the specific projects, they were able to go on to something else. And it was a good thing all around because those folks add so much value. And then, like I said, your team learns from them because they're working with them directly.
Right.
Having extra managers on your team,
Yeah. Okay. I think one of the things where I went, what, I think we should have Jennie on the show, was when I saw this infographic that you had posted on LinkedIn on how not to be a trusted advisor. And I went,
yes,
whoever Jennie is, she put that together. That's awesome. That's good enough for me to know that we should have her on. So
thank you.
I'd asked if you do have that pulled up. So if you're listening to this through iTunes or Spotify, or, you just have the audio version, if you go to the YouTube channel that we have, you should be able to see the full interview, the full video of the interview. And then also, as Jennie pulls up her screen, you will be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. And I wanted Jennie to kind of walk us through this.
Yes. So if you haven't read my stuff, I ask you to please go. I wrote a bunch of articles in July, and I have my website up. I like to bring humor to the workplace because I think the world is too stressed, as we as we are, and if you don't laugh, you cry. So I like to bring humor, and I like to turn things around and be silly. So this was something I wrote because I just thought it was funny.
Give us like the top two from here, maybe.
Okay, so there are a bunch of reasons. These are things that I've seen and actually encountered auditors who do this, and these are the kinds of behaviors that auditors do. And I made it in a way like I was selling this to management, like, hey, do you kind of at the bottom, I'm selling my little, like, to describe your auditors, but it's surefire ways to lose management's trust instead of trying to gain it, because of the things you do. You can tell management that you understand their business better than they do. Add some be condescending, add some flair. You can make it clear you're out to get them. We're the police, we're out to get you, that's it. And don't talk about risk, just be like, we're gotcha. You could take all their time up in meetings, just all their time, like hours and hours. Just don't let them do their day job, sit with them all day long. Just continue to expand your scope. Like, look at everything. You see something, keep going down the path and just look at everything, right? You can this is a story. I wrote this one because I was actually in a meeting where I encountered this. I was at an organization where I was the head of audit, and there was an external regulator coming to audit them. And I was thinking, we'll be buds, be great. We're all auditors, be great. And I went into the meeting, and they were all so stone-faced. I was actually nervous, and I've been doing this a very long time. And I was like, wow. And they just sat there stone-faced the whole time. And then all of a sudden, I said something that sparked their interest, and they were like, I was like, yeah. And I was like, did I say something? Did I say something wrong? Anyway, so silent treatment, be silent in meetings. Don't just act alarmed when they answer a question. Make sure to tell them how terrible they are. Just criticize them. You guys are terrible. Say that a lot. Use the word terrible, like laugh at them. Make a big deal out of minor issues. Like, you forgot to cross your T in this document. That's it. Write really harsh reports. Say like how terrible they are and how like, oh, they just failed everything. Use the word fail, and then just tell everything to the audit committee. Like, they are the worst. They no controls. And then I put 10 and I meant 9 because I didn't have a 10th one. So I said, I had a math challenger, but that's the way I look at things. I try to, like, you look at the preposterous and sort of like, and I've actually seen people do these things, which is why I was like, this is how auditors can lose the trust of management. I may do another one for management to talk about how they lose the trust of the auditors.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, and the first comment, if you're, again, looking at the screen, is from Ray, I'll just say Ray, who said, unfortunately, you probably did most of these over the years at some point. So it's probably something that we've all done, but it was a different approach, and there was some humor in the way that you explained basically how we lose their trust. And so anyway, I thought it was great. And that's, again, this is like, all right, yep, this is good. Let's have Jennie on. So
thank you. I appreciated that.
All right, I'm going to give you, I'll just give you the floor now, and however you see the world, you can explain that to us, or whatever else you want to right now. So again, I'll leave it to you. Take us home, Jennie.
I think that at the end of the day, everyone's goal is the same. I think we all want the companies to succeed, and I think everybody's got a different view of what that looks like. And I think that as auditors, we have to be aware that there are many, many nuances to what we do, and it's not so black and white, and that it will get you really far if you can get a sense of those nuances and really understand what management does and what they find important. Because like I said, if you're looking at something they don't care about, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time, and you're losing credibility. So understanding them, figuring out what it is that is valuable to them, and understanding that, unless you have some crazy circumstance where they don't believe they want the best for the organization, which happens, they want the best for the organization too. They want the numbers to be good. They want to do their projects. They want to do things the right way generally. So that's kind of, you think about it as we're partners here. You try to, and and the other thing I wanted to leave with everybody was, one of the things I've done is, in order to be valuable, you have to provide value, and that's not just in your audit reports. I have done a lot of sharing of things that we've done, like obviously narratives, flow charts, things you write, you give to them, right? You don't just be like, hey, that was a great conversation. You write it up and send it to me, because that's not their day job. That's your day job, right? So I've given them freebies, which is another way to bring value to them. And one of that is, for example, we did like a segregation of duties review as part of our audit. That was in our work papers, but I was like, I made this. Do you want it? I gave it to them. We also did checklists, and we tested things based on the checklist. Like, oh, was this done? Was that done? And I was like, do you want to use this for your monthly process? Have it. Like, we created a thing. You can have it. Like, it's company records. Like, it's not anything I have to keep secret. So, I gave it to them, and that giving the goodies, I called it like the goodies at the end, and sort of making sure that the auditees have a stake and they're gonna get something out of this is something that I find helps with the relationship building, which is so important as you're dealing with management.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.